seal the outer corridors, and reroute atmospheric control. Now Rothweller's tail cracked against the stone dais, sending a splinter skittering across the chamber floor. The vibration rolled under the curved seating tiers of the unified Galactic Council, a reminder of force restrained. His barked command had not been meant for execution. It was a reflex, a muscle twitch of authority in a chamber built for language, not action. Above them, the laser plasma displays rippled with angry crimson overlays, the schematics of Orion threshold stations spiraling and compressing, error signatures blooming like infection markers. In one corner, an alert flickered with untranslatable code, looped data packets repeating an impossible cadence. "We don't even know who holds the station," muttered Mechlin Dreiss, his frilled cheek pads distending in irritation as he adjusted the cuffs of his judicial carapace. "You propose war before we've named a thief. Someone hijacked an artifact vault laced with graviton destabilizers and temporal rig cores." Veller shot back, his compound eyes flaring. A response should not require a family portrait first. Steam curled from a black ceramic cup resting untouched on the smooth surface before Ambassador Senrik Vor. He hadn't spoken since the chamber convened. His tailored coat, monochrome, dustless, creased only by deliberate folds, hung silently around him like a second skin. The warmth from the beverage had already faded, yet the cup remained centered, perfectly aligned with the etched emblem of Terran presence, a triskelion composed of neural nodes, overlapping time markers, and one singular dot, Earth. Vor reached forward, not for the tea, for the slate beside it. His fingers moved with the motion of someone correcting a discrepancy, one tap, then another. The light shifted across his face as a heads-up display bloomed vertically from the surface, just softly enough not to distract the others, but bright enough for him to record everything. "Ambassador Vor," Dreiss said, gesturing lazily with a finger whose joint crackled audibly, "your delegation has remained suspiciously mute on the matter. Does Earth have no concern over the loss of a Class 9 research facility?" Vor's gaze remained fixed on the information pane. "Then, we have concern. We do not share your appetite for audible grief." Murmurs rippled like static across the higher rows, avian diplomats rustled feathers, ammonia-based respirators chirped in rhythm, and one emissary, a gas-formed delegate from Iskar Zen, contracted visibly, its translucent outer sheath fogging. The room responded less to the statement than the way it had been delivered, even low and not remotely defensive. "With respect, we've seen this tactic before," Veller said, pacing now. His boots scraped lightly on the stone in a syncopated rhythm, claws retracted, still polite. "You wait until we exhaust ourselves in motion, then you calibrate behind our backs." Phrase Ikar, seated beside Vor and posing still as a linguistics observer, didn't lift his eyes from the auxiliary relay console in front of him. His knuckles flexed beneath the projection layer, one twitch every 5 seconds. "No words, no defense. You requested Terran translators after the fragment accords," Vor replied, finally glancing up. "We provided clarity, not conquest." "And yet," Dreiss countered, his gills fluttering in disgust, "the moment a treaty crumbles, you recline behind legal ambiguity." "Ambiguity is not ours," Vor corrected. His tone carried the chill of a sealed door. The laser plasma displays above flashed again, this time a Council ComNode location map. An entire quadrant of communications channels had gone dark. Dreiss blinked, adjusted his vision filters, and leaned in. "Redundant arrays should have prevented that drop," he said, "not to anyone in particular." "They did," Phrase answered, still without looking up. "The logs were overwritten from the source. A beat, no movement from Vor." "From where?" Veller asked, suspicion replacing certainty. Phrase looked up then, slowly, from within the station. Dreiss exhaled, his chest sacs deflating with a hiss. "So it's sabotage." Veller thudded his tail again, another shard fractured from the dais edge. His voice now rode above the chamber's ambient churn. "Then authorize the full war protocol." "Now." "No," Dreiss said, his tone clipped. "We must issue a formal contact attempt. Draft an intent quorum. We do not escalate blindly. You delay because you fear acting without consensus." Veller snapped. "And you act without thought," Dreiss returned. At the center, Vor stood. The action froze every argument mid-breath. His slate retracted, his cup remained untouched. "The transcript will note your positions," he said. He turned, his boots making no sound on the polished obsidian tiles. The council's domed ceiling glimmered faintly above, etched in the languages of all 42 member species. Vor didn't glance at them. He walked without haste, flanked by no one. Frey's stood moments later, followed without instruction. Veller snarled, but said nothing. His eyes stayed locked on the pulsing schematic of Orion Threshold, now marked with static blocks labeled unreachable. Dryce sank back into his seat, fingers clasped before him. "They're already moving," he murmured. Veller didn't answer. His tail curled tighter beneath the cracked dais, and behind them, steam no longer rose from the Terran cup, only the cold impression of its once living warmth. "Mark the relay. 2 ticks from dead. If they see a flicker, reroute through Junction 3, no hesitation." Commander Rovar Tannik's voice was low, more felt than heard, slipping through the confined dark of the service crawl. His left hand braced against the warm conduit wall, condensation smeared under his palm, mixing with the film of station dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. Above him, a curved panel flickered with amber readouts, a compact heads-up display, suspended in mid-air by a clipped beamlight, lodged into the duct's spine. The lines danced in tight coordination, temperature shifts, load flux, vent compression, and highlighted in icy green, looped sensor playback. Tannik reached over and slid a thumb-sized chip into a discrete port, tucked beneath a corroded alignment rail. The footage stuttered once, then resumed, showing the same stretch of hallway on a 30-second delay, no sign of intrusion, no deviation from schedule. To every alien monitor beyond this bulkhead, nothing had changed. "Relay masked," murmured Delvon, a lean-framed operative crouched ahead, knees tight to his chest. His exosuit whirred quietly as he adjusted the pressure clamps on his knees. Not words, just calibrated responses. "Advance 3 meters. Next bend, right angle drop," Tannik instructed. They moved like liquid shadow, 4 men in sequence, each occupying no more space than necessary. Every breath was measured, every glance cross-referenced with data. The air in the crawlspace tasted of warm oil and static residue, faintly sour where ancient sealant compounds had begun to degrade. It wasn't rot. It was age. Tannik paused at a junction node. The conduit before him throbbed faintly with load. Its internal regulation grid was near failure, though it hadn't tripped the alien alarm protocols yet. Good. That meant it could still be redirected. He knelt, removed a flat tool wrapped in black silk, and inserted the edge into the seam between panel and pipe. A soft crack whispered down the shaft as he disengaged the first lock. 2 more clicks. The panel folded open, like the lid of a forgotten archive. Inside, cooling rods flickered with residual entropy, tiny arcs discharging from jagged fins. He pulled a thread of thermal weavers from his belt, pressed the filament across the contact grid, and locked it with a rotating clasp. 1 breath passed, then another. The weaver unraveled, embedding itself within the flow, slowing the heat bleed to just below collapse, enough to trigger system compensation, but not a fault alert. It would seem, to the station's regulatory AI, like it had simply aged faster than expected. Within 40 minutes, the chamber's thermal map would rise 4 degrees. In a station handling graviton lattice experimentation, that meant cascade destabilization, the kind that didn't explode, but unwound. He wiped condensation from his glove with 1 swipe against the pad of his thigh. "Rodders on," he said. "Initiate ghost line." Behind him, the Stek Aral, their dataman, connected a relay brick to the station's internal logging core. The interface flared violet for a second, mimicking the command language of the Dominion's own maintenance drones. It wasn't faked. Earth had long since absorbed and rewritten the Dominion's base code into a more flexible derivative. Signature scrubbed. Audit trail bleeds clean. Logs reflect scheduled maintenance from Axis 12 technicians. Tannik didn't nod. He simply moved on. The hatchway before them ended in a triangular duct. Tannik tapped a microfuse into the edge seam. It dissolved on contact, not with heat, but via kinetic erosion, molecules rewritten by vibration, until the latch simply gave way. He slid downward, boots gliding across the silent finish of the inner catwalk below. The station's lower ring stretched outward like a rib cage, piping coiled along the walls, blinking panels casting narrow bands of pulsing cyan. Below them, 2 alien workers, likely unauthorized scavengers wearing stolen crew tags, floated in anti-grav boots. Their suits carried no command registry pulse. Freelancers, perhaps, Tannic observed, listened, waited. They spoke in clipped bursts, low guttural tones peppered with a clicking dialect. Distraction. One of them slapped the side of a locker, laughing. The other tapped something into a tablet. Neither noticed the silent override cycling behind them. Delta movement, cover phase, Tannic said. Vaughn slid behind a coolant manifold. Errol disappeared into shadow. Tannic advanced, straight-backed, footsteps synced to the rhythm of a maintenance fan's cycle. When the louder worker turned, there was a whisper and a twist, an arm around the neck, pressure in a targeted burst at the throat, body crumpling mid-motion. Not a sound. The other spun, blinking in slow recognition. Errol stepped behind him, snapped an injector to the base of the scavenger's spine. Nerve latch, paralysis in under a second. The man didn't drop, he simply froze, one hand still mid-gesture, one eye twitching. Tannic's words came sharp, quiet, stow them, look accidental. Bodies were wedged behind equipment crates, helmets tilted forward, tablets positioned nearby as if reading schematics. Anyone scanning the area would see inattentive contractors, nothing more. The laser plasma display near the central hatch rippled. One of their planted signatures had propagated. The station now read its own failure as acceptable deviation. Errol exhaled, rubbing his brow, looped the intake diagnostics. System thinks it's running 30% hot, within variance. That's your one deviation. No more, Tannic said. His voice was colder now, thinner than before. From this point forward, we bleed nothing. We erase it before it breathes. They moved again, deeper this time. The corridors narrowed. Overhead panels cycled into alert amber, but the lighting system had already been looped. No new motion was being recorded. Tannic halted outside a final vault chamber, a reinforced blast door, 10 inches thick, not locked, but watched. The hallway sensors pulsed in synchronized rhythm, tuned to detect shifts in movement and thermal change. He tapped his chest. Dampeners to 0, manual crawl. All 4 operatives dropped low. They moved like insects across a flat field. No noise, no bounce, breath synced to motion. Each second passed with a measured crawl. No flicker from the display. They reached the vault's access panel. Tannic drew a carving rod, etched a sliver-thin line along the sensor plate, and inserted a protocol key. The door hissed open just enough to reveal the exposed spine of the station's relay controls. Inside, the cooling rods already trembled under the stress load. No return, Tannic said. Eyes narrowed, no trace. He snapped the latch closed. The line had been crossed, and far above, in the council chamber, a red light blinked once, then disappeared. 2 cycles? That's your response time for a hijack. Rothveller's forelimbs slammed against the table's ridged edge, the sound sharp enough to ripple through the lower tiers of the chamber. The curved walls did not absorb the impact. They echoed it once, then again, as if mocking the delay it represented. The laser plasma displays overhead shifted tone. Not red now, but amber. A cautionary pulse meant to suggest coordination in progress. Instead, it pulsed like a warning swallowed by formality. Mechlin Dreiss didn't flinch. He raised one digit, slowly rotating his wrist as he turned to the other delegates. Let the minutes reflect that I oppose immediate escalation. Our last hasty maneuver ignited 7 border fires. We do not respond to shadows with fire. Then die in the dark, Vaylor muttered under his breath. Dreiss's gills fluttered. We've issued an investigation writ. A probe launches within 2 cycles, equipped with null-wave beacons and treaty-bearing authority. If the intruders respond, they won't, Vaylor interjected. If they're organized enough to strip out command layer permissions, they won't entertain a formal greeting. On the far side of the chamber, Frey Zakar leaned forward slightly. His console blinked with a local admin request. Access routed through Sector 6's comm node. He tapped once. The request vanished. 2 seconds later, it reappeared with new parameters. Unauthorized echo bounce from a council subrelay. He didn't smile. He rerouted the signal through a dormant maintenance channel and buried the log under 10,000 kilobytes of fabricated drone telemetry. Then he blinked once and resumed appearing to review dialect schematics. The feed on the central pillar display wavered, just briefly. A quarter-second stutter, then blankness. It returned with a still frame of the station exterior, frozen in perspective, like a paused moment holding its breath. "I ask again," Dryce said, louder now, "what evidence confirms this is more than an isolated breach? You all shout conspiracy, yet we lack identity, motive, and contact." A feathered diplomat from the Ractal conclave raised a wing. "Their silence is the motive." Murmurs crept across the hall. Rothveller watched Vor, seated again near the far curvature of the chamber. The Terran's chair hadn't moved. Neither had his gaze. "Ambassador Vor," Dryce said, drawing the room's attention, "perhaps now is the moment for Earth to inform us of its intentions. You've said nothing since the incident began." A pause stretched the chamber thin. Senrik Vor lifted a single hand and rotated the console toward himself. The heads-up display flickered silently, fed lines of code behind a privacy shroud. He tapped twice. The chamber lighting adjusted subtly, barely a shift, but enough that the upper ring of spectators stirred, unsure if they had witnessed a glitch or command. Then Vor spoke. "Let them watch themselves." Confusion twisted through Dryce's expression. "Clarify." Vor rotated the console back and folded his hands. "I believe your probe will find mirrors where windows should be." On the opposite side of the hall, Fraze's console fed him a new return. 10 internal signal traces had been looped. 8 more flagged as authentic, but originated from pre-seeded Terran channels camouflaged under Dominion relay formats. He slid one data string into the Council's system buffer. Immediately, a display overhead began to stutter. What had shown the Orion Threshold's perimeter cam now looped with an error cascade. Timecode mismatch. Refer to redundancy mirror. That mirror no longer existed. Fraze had scrubbed it 20 minutes ago. The station's exterior view vanished. In its place, black. "Why are we blind?" barked Veller. A technician at the chamber's edge tapped furiously into his station. His voice trembled. "The feed appears active, but the signal is showing nothing. There's no fault report." Dryce leaned forward. "Are we being fed a ghost signal?" A chime echoed once through the chamber, a Council procedural alert. 5 subsystems offline, no verified maintenance tags, no alarms triggered, no station-wide defense protocols engaged, just a quiet detachment of vital senses. The air itself seemed thicker, the stillness of a predator's gaze, not quite noticed, but felt under the skin. "The station is non-responsive to command pings," the technician added, barely audible now. "We're seeing packet delay, checksum loopbacks, and internal rerouting we didn't initiate." Veller turned sharply toward Vor. "Explain this." Vor didn't stand. "Perhaps you're asking the wrong network." Fraze allowed himself one brief glance toward his superior. Vor offered nothing in return. His presence was a silence with weight. "I propose we initiate an internal sweep of all diplomatic systems," Dryce said, his voice too calm now, like a man walking a tightrope he didn't know was already cut. Earth's infrastructure included. The Ractal diplomat flared her wing in alarm. "That violates protocol, Lysithea." "The protocol," Dryce replied, "did not anticipate Earth writing new rules from inside our firewall." Veller stepped forward, claws flexing slowly. "Then Earth's silence ends here. Vor, withdraw your delegates, or submit to audit." Vor didn't move. The chamber's lights flickered once. Above, a display scrolled through the most recent contact logs. Each showed verified communication cycles from Dominion-aligned terminals, each routed through a Terran-coded checksum. Identities faked, commands injected. "This isn't sabotage," said Dryce, barely whispering. "It's architecture." Veller's face twisted. "Then how long?" The technician stood slowly from his station. His eyes had lost focus. "We've been watching the wrong feeds, for at least a cycle, possibly more." Vor stood. "No theatrics, just motion, deliberate." "We've merely shown you what you forgot to monitor," he said. "You chose delay, we installed discipline." The chamber held no reply, and across the Council dome, viewport after viewport blackened, not in failure, but in message. Observation was no longer mutual, surveillance was no longer shared, the watchers were being watched. "Cue the broadcast." Senrik Vor's words were flat, stripped of ceremony. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. The Council chamber obeyed the gravity of absence, the kind left behind when one realizes control had been a borrowed illusion. The central dais dimmed. Around the curved perimeter, The laser plasma displays pulsed into a stark white grid before dissolving into sharp black silence. Then movement, a flicker, then raw data. Footage surged to life on the main panel, time-stamped, location tagged, unedited. A tight corridor inside Orion Threshold Station, infrared signatures faint beneath static overlays. The air shimmered slightly from overloaded relays. Coolant ducts on the wall glistened with condensation. No ambient sound was fed, just the rhythmic sweep of motion-tagged cameras. Then, shadows, 4 figures in matte black suits, crawling low under the line of sensor fields. The chamber collectively leaned forward. Even Dryce, who rarely gave his attention to visuals over policy, was locked to the screen. "Stop playback," Vor said. The footage halted on a frame. One of the figures turned slightly, visor catching the feed's lens in reflection. A tag appeared on the lower left, auto-embedded by the camera's signature recognition protocols. ID, CM.er Rovar Tanik, Terran deployment, subunit, Latchfall. No one spoke. Resume. The screen lurched forward again. The operatives reached a graviton junction, its exterior flickering with discharges, meant to stabilize experimental mass density algorithms. One agent extended a small slate. It pulsed, mapping the internal signal lattice. Another retrieved a fiber-thin cable, inserted it directly into the core's spine. From there, the station's gravity buffers shifted half a degree, not enough to detect through standard diagnostics. Enough, however, to reroute localized mass influence, causing ongoing experiments to subtly fold into recursive feedback. Given enough time, it would neutralize every active algorithm the station was running. "We recorded this hours ago," Roth Veller asked, though the question was rhetorical. Vor remained still. "Longer." Dryce rose, his voice tight. "Under what authority did you initiate armed reclamation?" "I didn't." Dryce's lip curled, his gills twitching involuntarily. "Then explain." Vor's answer came without inflection. "We prepared." Another clip played, this time from a maintenance corridor near the atmospheric control matrix. 2 station crew, likely hijackers based on irregular suit tagging, stood in idle conversation, unaware of the figure descending silently from a ceiling duct. Tanik again. One arm hooked the first man's throat. The second fell seconds later after a calculated pressure injection between vertebrae. The camera panned and froze again, this time with audio lag catching up. "Stack them like workers on rest shift. We don't leave questions." Frazee Carr, seated near the chamber's rear access console, triggered a secondary feed. Not station footage, Council internal systems audit logs, dozens of entries unspooled, server access initiated via non-existent identities, signal redirection, using outdated yet still trusted encryption codes, all originating from diplomatic relay nodes. Nodes Earth had been asked to manage as a neutral third party 5 cycles prior. The room's temperature felt lower now. "Your agents moved independently," Dryce said, slow, each word folded in accusation. "No council approval, no recorded sanction, no quorum, no resistance either," Vor said, perhaps because no one knew it was happening. A new display blinked to life, network flow charts, lines of connection between Council subnetworks and Terran buffer systems. Overlaid across it, microscripts, designed to monitor packet shifts, packet delays, command spoofing. These were installed under standard translation modules, Phrase explained. "We disguised them as lexical normalization packages. Each passively mapped your packet signatures. That data gave us entry to every command layer you forgot to firewall." Dryce took a step forward. "You mined the Council's spine, correct?" Vor replied. Veller stood. "This is espionage under Council law." "No," Vor countered. "It's maintenance. You gave us access. We simply didn't share the diagnostic results." More footage, this time from the station's deep cycle intake core. Gravity distortions rolled through the feed as 2 agents disabled safety protocols. There were no alarms. The system thought it had been scheduled. The visual ended with a silent shutdown. No fire, no breach, just the disintegration of capability. The scene changed. A Council communications technician station. A timestamp. Terran code embedded in a help patch. The patch ran a side process that masked internal messaging to and from the station, making it appear silent, even as human operators moved through it. "We weren't looking," Dryce admitted, not proudly. You weren't built to, Vor said. That's why you needed us. The final clip played. Tanik and his unit, standing at the central core of the station's command sector. Bodies lay behind them, neatly arranged to appear undisturbed. Systems continued to report operational norms. Tanik's visor turned toward the central control feed and paused. The footage paused as well. Vor tapped the table once. He never sent a signal to me. That isn't how we designed it. He executed a scenario that required no approval, only activation. Your failure met the condition. Dryce sat slowly. His eyes did not move from the screen. We thought your silence was diplomacy. No, Vor said. It was arrangement. Veller's tail flicked once. Then what's the goal? Retaliation? Occupation? What do you want from this? Vor did not blink. Nothing. This was never a request. We're not after power. We're after stability. And you think this is stability? Dryce spat. I think what you called unity was entropy in disguise, Vor replied. We offered tools. You never asked what they did when you stopped watching. The screens faded to black again. Every delegate sat wordless, seated in a room built to govern, and now clearly shown to have only watched. The silence didn't feel imposed. It was realized. Cycle split. Reroute them into Corridor G9. Let the noise carry them. Commander Rovar Tanik issued the order without inflection, crouched beside a pressure intake node dripping from hairline fractures. Frost webbed across the pipe's exterior, forming slow branching veins of brittle ice. The coolant flood had begun, and with it, the end of coherence for anyone still moving through the station's arteries, without a plan. Above them, filtered ventilation hissed in low irregular pulses, no longer synced with the breathable rhythm the hijackers had assumed was stable. The air was thinning, stealthily, not through breach, but through redirected flow. No explosions, no alarms, just a gradual engineered drift toward suffocation. A distant footstep echoed, followed by two sharp turns of direction. Tanik raised a hand, fingers curled in a downward motion. His team, 4 shadows in heat-shielded suits, vanished into parallel ducts without sound. Below them, 5 armed intruders charged toward what they believed was a breach point. Their boots thudded against the grated flooring, echoing their desperation in clipped metallic stutters. They had been guided by falsified internal warnings, forged system alerts, and thermal ghosts planted into the feed by Frey's Ikar, already pulsing out of the Council's relay core like digital echoes. In the Council chamber, the laser plasma displays flickered with live telemetry, no longer managed by the Council's trusted analysts. What the delegates saw was curated, a choreographed collapse captured in data pulses and tagged system failures. A static burst rattled the chamber. There in the airlocks, cut off Corridor 9, Veller snapped, claws grating across his console's surface, as if pressure alone might change what they were watching. They're not in Corridor 9, Frey said, eyes never lifting from his display. They're in a loop. You're watching recorded overlays layered onto their own helmet feeds. Veller blinked hard. Then where are they? Frey's replied without turning. Nowhere useful. Inside the station, Tanik slid behind a pressurization terminal. He tapped his slate, and the station's backup coolant pumps rerouted into the hijackers' quarters, not as a defense mechanism, but as environmental drift. The cold wouldn't kill immediately. It would saturate cognition, disrupt coordination, and fray judgment like fingers dragging across dry cloth. Cycle intake at 32%, his second muttered, eyeing his readout. Frost density climbing, visibility dropping. Let it fall, Tanik responded. They'll see shapes we didn't place. That'll be enough. Red warning beacons flared in the hijackers' corridors, not because of active threats, but because temperature variance exceeded safety norms. The false alerts matched Dominion specs, blinking emergency status for workers too rushed to double-check codebase validation. One of the intruders slipped on a floor slick with frozen condensation. His weapon clattered away, a dull clank followed by a grunt and a muttered order. 2 others turned toward the sound, breathing rapid inside helmets now fogging from the inside. Seal subdeck A14, Tanik said, pressing 2 fingers against a biometric latch on the nearest control panel. A whisper of hydraulics sounded, then silence. The men below hadn't noticed they'd been cut off from the station's midline power routes. Their AI assistance loops were now dead. Heat regulation terminated. Internal comms jammed. They had each other, and panic. In the chamber, Dryce stood stiffly. "Shut it down now," he bellowed. Phrase adjusted one dial. "You already did." All eyes shifted toward him. He gestured toward the right side display, which showed a full systems overlay of Orion threshold. Every live indicator blinked, active, green. But beneath the visible feed, a second layer bled through, shadow signals, false pings, mirrored loops. The station's own sensors had been tricked into logging their own confusion. Veller paced. His tail flicked with deliberate cadence. "If they freeze the lower ring, we lose the artifact containment lines. The lattice will destabilize. Then they shouldn't have hijacked the station," Vor said evenly. Footage resumed. Tannick's unit now inside the gravity modulation control sector. The walls shimmered with moisture, mist curled upward in gentle spirals from exposed coolant lines. A hijacker stumbled past, eyes unfocused, weapon half raised. He didn't speak, he couldn't. Tannick stepped around a pillar, placed a gloved hand on the man's shoulder, and squeezed just above the clavicle. The figure dropped silently, eyes rolling back. His fall made no sound. It was as if the air itself refused to carry it. His body was dragged behind a filtration tank. The rest of his team would assume he'd gotten lost, or wandered off from the looped path they now believed was their only route forward. Back in the command tier, a crack bloomed across a pressure valve, hair-thin, spider leg fractures stretching outward from a central node. A vent opened just enough to expel a breath of crystalline vapor, feathering across the chamber's lowest rung. The walls glistened where the frost reached them. "We're beginning to see hallucination reports in their helmet feedback," Phrase said. "One thinks he's being followed. Another asked for fire support. There is none. They'll kill each other trying to escape." Dryce whispered. "No," Vor corrected. "They'll fail before the need arises." The chamber's atmosphere no longer thrummed with defiance. Delegates who had once roared now watched, hands locked tight to consoles, eyes narrowed, unsure whether they were observers or targets. Veller stepped forward again. "You could have warned us." "We did," Vor said. "You called it translation." More footage loaded. In slow sequence, each corridor sealed behind the Terran team, each door closed by station systems no longer under local control, each hijacker funneled, isolated, disoriented. There were no firefights, no carnage, just removal, one presence at a time, into the cold. Inside the station, a final corridor glowed red with emergency lighting. Frost coiled across the floor in loops, spiraling toward a duct where air no longer moved. From overhead, Tannick's voice was clear through his team's encrypted line. "Only two left. They'll run themselves into the backup lab vaults if they follow that pattern. They'll suffocate," his second noted. Tannick replied with a quiet nod. "Then we're nearly finished." "Bring up the vol chain." Senrik Vor's command landed like a verdict, not shouted, not rushed, just delivered with the clarity of something long prepared. The laser plasma displays darkened, then bloomed with shifting streams of encoded transactions, numeric strings, flag transfers, authorization sigils from over a dozen worlds. It was not sabotage. It was funding. At the center of the trail, Baron Tavros Vol, Council Finance Committee Advisor, Senior Architect of Infrastructure Stabilization Funds, and as of this moment, the single thread that unraveled the illusion of alien unity. Miklan Dryce froze. His gaze sharpened, not in disbelief, but in delayed recognition. "These are private allocations, contingency remittances, authorized under discretional clauses." "No," Vor said, tilting his hand. The feed adjusted. A secondary set of layers appeared. Biometric confirmations, retinal traces tied to signature moments. Vol's access pattern, matched twice through old neutral terminals, leased to Dominion trade zones, and relinked through a comm satellite that had gone dark 3 cycles ago. Beside Vor, Phrase Ikar expanded the data stream. The remittances funded transport logistics to the Orion threshold, 6 standard months prior to the hijack. The Council seal was appended through a now-defunct diplomatic authorization shell, coded through ports assigned to archival recovery. "Meaning," growled Roth Veller, his claws half extended, "meaning the entire operation was masked as treaty salvage." Phrase answered, "Approved through your own resource matrix." An audible intake of breath rippled through the chamber. Communications Officer Tharnell Drek stood from his console tier near the chamber's edge. His usually dispassionate tone carried a tremor beneath the surface. We confirmed secondary signal leaks, some dating back 6 cycles, most routed through shielded clerical subnets. Traffic was rerouted into dead exchange caches. Every packet bore origin from a location registered under Baron Vol's former staff. That staff was vetted, Dryce said, although the firmness had slipped from his voice. They were vetted by protocols your office wrote, Vor replied. Another tap. The display morphed into a timeline. Each funding marker pulsed red. Every one overlapped with a shift in council oversight, planetary crises, or minor regulatory distractions. It hadn't been a crime of opportunity. It had been architecture. Veller stepped forward, tail lashing behind him in sharp arcs. Even if he did move credits, that does not explain the Terran presence. You still acted without mandate. You gave us infrastructure, Vor said, then forgot who held the maintenance key. I'm demanding withdrawal of all Terran operatives from galactic systems, Veller snapped, voice echoing hard against the arching walls, effective immediately. You can't recall what was never yours. Vor's reply was as calm as snow falling through firelight. Dryce sat, not out of defeat, out of weight. The feed now showed a cascading map, every communications relay touched by Earth's optimization packages, every transit node embedded with Terran feedback controls. Each spark that flickered along the map was a location the Council no longer owned, even if it bore their emblem. You installed this beneath us, Dryce said, jaw clenched. No, Vor corrected. You installed it yourselves. You just stopped tracking it once it worked better than yours. Tharnell toggled a subset of the network feed. A branching trail emerged, an encrypted command sequence sent from Vol's private archive 3 days before the Orion incident. It had contained no words, just an activation trigger, preparing the hijack for a handoff that never arrived. You weren't attacked, Vor said. You were inherited. Veller turned, jaw flexing beneath his mandibular plate. This isn't diplomacy. This is a colonization. Phrase activated a final overlay. Signed treaties, their ink still preserved in archival scans, scrolled across the display. One bore the Vol crest, the next the emblem of Protocol Lysithea. Terran access permission, infrastructure sharing clause, signed in alien blood, both ceremonial and literal. Every operation was logged under the treaty you ratified. Phrase said. The clause for stabilization response in the event of failure to act was buried, yes, but still active. You exploited us through our own negligence, Veller said, voice hoarse. Your negligence required intervention, Vor replied. We simply designed the structure to allow it. Across the room, several delegates looked toward their aides. No orders were given, none needed to be. The calculus was rewriting itself behind every still face. Power was no longer about who spoke loudest. It was about who had already embedded themselves beneath your thresholds. Dryce turned to Vor. What do you want? We want nothing, Vor said, standing at last. But we will no longer apologize for acting, while you discuss failure as if it requires a unanimous vote. The laser plasma feed shifted again. One last reveal. The signature code used to transmit the hijack alert. It wasn't Terran. It wasn't Dominion. It bore the watermark of Baron Tavros Vol's own private comm unit, registered to a dead terminal in the Iskarion belt, sent the moment the station's internal regulations were overridden. He funded the breach, Dryce whispered, and signaled the activation. The hijackers were never outsiders, Phrase added. They were his deniable architecture, cut loose once failure became likely. You don't control all systems, Veller said, but it came out strained, uncertain. No, Vor agreed. Just the ones you built badly. The chamber fell into cold stillness. Delegates who had spent lifetimes interpreting nuance now stared not at rhetoric, but data, not metaphor, but exposure. They had not merely lost control of the station, they had lost ownership of their own assumptions, and Earth hadn't even raised its voice. Load the grid. Senric Vor's tone did not shift as he issued the instruction, but the effect was immediate. Every laser plasma display across the chamber shimmered to life, not with footage or warnings but with design. Structured blueprints populated the air in clean layers, forming columns, junctions, and soft pulsing nodal links that reached from one star system to another like vascular roots knitting under glass. Where once the Council saw scattered infrastructure, the overlays revealed what had always existed beneath their reach: Terran control hubs, embedded through treaties, optimization packages, and civilian tech partnerships they had signed, re-signed, and never truly read. One delegate stood, another adjusted his collar, none spoke. Frazikar stepped forward with a portable projection node, syncing its input with the main grid. His fingers barely moved, but the additions bloomed: subsurface relays, hidden fallback nodes, enforcement blind spots already mapped and corrected. 37 of your planetary exchanges were operating with open-loop access controls, he said, voice clinical. We closed them. Tharnul Drek, still perched behind his council console, pulled up the secondary stream. A comparative feed split the screen. One side displayed the current status, stable, the other before Earth's involvement. Open authentication, drift latency. Entire networks vulnerable to falsified identity codes. You patched over sovereign systems, Dryce said, though there was no accusation in his voice now, only the weight of revelation. Vor stepped beside the central terminal and opened the final tier. This is not a military presence, he said. There are no Terran garrisons, no warships, no fleet integration. These are civic protocols, data management, dispute arbitration, comms routing. Another layer rendered, liaison stations at critical fault lines, painted in soft blue, ringed by administrative access keys. Each one mirrored a choke point the Council had already acknowledged as unstable. We positioned Terran nodes where your debates stalled, Phrase added. You designated them as inactive mediation sites. We activated them. A long silence followed, the kind that compresses rather than empties. Dryce pressed both palms to his tabletop. Do we still rule? Vor tilted his head slightly. You decide which illusion comforts you. The map zoomed to highlight Vera 9, a known trade nexus. The pulse grid there showed 10 active Terran microhubs, each camouflaged as logistics overseers. Trade routes now flowed exclusively through those hubs. The Council hadn't noticed, it simply functioned better than before. Rothveller straightened, shoulders taut. You'll draw down after this, remove Terran access from all internal systems, undo the shadow hand. Vor answered without pause, no, but we'll let you rename it if that helps you sleep. The reply landed like ice dropped into boiling water. Sharp hiss, immediate silence. One of the Ractyl diplomats adjusted his wing, the feathers trembling as if catching a new current. What do you want in exchange? We've taken nothing, Vor said. We've simply stopped waiting for consensus before keeping systems alive. Dryce rose again, slower this time. There are paths from this, but not if we label it conquest. Phrase tapped a single sequence into the portable interface. The map compressed into 3 rings, each a phase in the proposed control stabilization plan. Phased integration, shared oversight, precedent review protocols. He pointed toward the upper tier. You'll still vote. We'll just make sure what you vote on isn't already bleeding out. Tharnul leaned in. The gaps you ignored, humans didn't. While your channels leaked, we intercepted. While your stations failed, we patched from outside your chain of command. Without request, Dryce said. Without delay, Phrase corrected. Veller stepped forward once more. You imply benevolence, but what stops you from turning those hubs into weapons? Vor met his gaze. Nothing. But we haven't, and you still exist. He said it without threat, without pride, just as fact. The laser plasma displays dimmed to grayscale, leaving only the pulsing nodal veins behind. Trade grids, power flow, arbitration lines, all tethered, not by physical force, but by reliance. They could be severed, yes, but only at the cost of returning to dysfunction. This was never about domination, Vor said. It was about momentum. We simply stopped letting entropy wear the mask of process. Dryce reached out and traced one line of the map with his fingertip. It pulsed softly beneath his skin, a Terran tag flickering into view, identifiable only by those who knew where to look. I misread you, he murmured. I thought silence was submission. No, Vor said. It was calibration. The council chamber did not erupt. It didn't crumble. It adjusted, like a structure discovering its weight had long been redistributed, while no one noticed. One delegate from the Surlan Reach broke the stillness. What would be your first request under shared governance? Vor answered without needing to consult a slate. Upgrade your memory cores. The gaps you forget, we fill. The lies you believe, we correct. And if we refuse, then chaos will remind you what forgetting costs. No one laughed. They understood, now that Earth did not conquer in blasts or banners. It seeped into cracks left by disinterest, and when it finally spoke, it did not ask for crowns. It installed audits. Initiate full registry purge. Wipe every Dominion tag from station schema. Commander Rovar Tanik didn't wait for acknowledgement. His words were final. Not an order for discussion. Not a suggestion floated in doubt. The technician beside him moved without speaking, fingers already brushing the slate to unchain the last hard-coded ident blocks. Each input blinked once before fading out, silent confirmations of irreversible shifts. Above them, Orion threshold flickered from the Dominion grid. One moment it existed in the interstellar cartography of 3 empires. The next, it was a dead coordinate. On the laser plasma display stretched across the vault wall, a single pulse ran through the control feed, each channel blinking blue, then green, then black. Tanik stepped back as the last remnant of the hijacker's influence dissolved under Terran override. No detonations, no alarms, just erasure. He turned toward the chamber door. Station secure. Legacy data overwritten. We hold it now. In the Unified Galactic Council, silence had a different weight now. It no longer suggested uncertainty. It denoted realization, a long-delayed understanding that the walls they built had been propped up by hands they never saw. Senrik Vor stood beside the central interface. No ornament decorated the dais anymore. The alien seal that once adorned its front panel lay discarded on the floor, cracked where Veller's tail had split it during the last vote. The vote itself had passed, barely, 29-24, not with cheers or ceremony, just resigned affirmations. Most of the delegates couldn't even look at the screens when they spoke. Their sovereignty now existed on paper, in charters never read aloud. Frey's Ikar, seated 2 tiers below Vor, watched as Terran overlays continued seeding through the Council's system. The nodes weren't just access points, they were embedded correction loops. When a Council server drifted off spec, Terran protocols rerouted it. No alerts, no warnings, just silent, continuous adjustment. 73, Frey said quietly. Vor glanced down. Say again. Confirmed Terran anchors. Embedded, active. Frey tapped his interface once. Spanning 6 galactic quadrants. Across the chamber, Dryce stood with both hands resting on the edge of his station. He no longer argued, no longer negotiated. His voice came softer now, hollowed by truth. How long were you going to wait before showing us this? Vor offered a brief glance. We weren't. Veller's claws tapped once against his console's edge. And if the vote had failed, then we'd have installed a shadow directive. Vor paused, quieter perhaps, but unchanged. You built your web in our walls, Dryce murmured. No, Vor corrected, stepping down from the central platform. We reinforced your ruins. A junior delegate from the Marith Combine whispered to his aide, voice trembling. We were never in control, were we? His aide didn't answer. He simply looked at the central feed, where a final screen now pulsed. Orion threshold registry, removed. Below that, a quiet signature marked in soft Terran glyphs, asset realigned. Tanik's confirmation feed lit Vor's display, mission complete. The council chamber no longer stirred, no dissent, no protest, not from fatigue, but from understanding. This wasn't dominance through force, it was control through inevitability. One they hadn't noticed until it was irreversible. Vor turned once more toward the tiered hall. His eyes passed over each delegate. He saw no enemies, only delays. Predators don't threaten, he said, voice steady. We prepare. The words didn't echo. The room was too full of stillness. Not fear, not fury, just the closing of a chapter none of them wrote. Frey's closed his terminal. Tharnal Drek dimmed the last council interface. Even Veller said nothing. The dais before him, now split in 2, symbolized more than their broken vote. Senrik Vor stepped off the floor without fanfare. His path was clear. No guards escorted him. None blocked his exit. Behind him the council remained seated, not because they chose to, but because they no longer knew what standing meant. On the station, Tanik watched the lights dim to Terran standard. He removed his gloves, ran his hand along the recalibrated control board and exhaled. Not relief, completion. Above him, a viewport blinked with a message from Earth's Central Command. Phase integration complete. Await further vector. Tanik keyed in his final response. Structure held, no permission required. As his words disappeared into the encryption channel, The station lights settled into silence. The stars beyond didn't blaze. They blinked, unmoved, indifferent, unchanged, just as Earth had always appeared, and from now on the galaxy would call it what it always was: Apex.